Today's daf is daf Nun Zayin, one of the saddest dafim in Shas. And it's a gigantic agadita. I mean, there are more words on this daf probably than 5 dafim in general. So I don't know how we're going to finish it in an hour, but we'll see how it goes. So on the top of daf Nun Zayin, we're up to line 3, Ozal. And if you remember, we were talking about Unkelus, Aske Levilam Benegida. He was able to bring up Bilam from an oath by using oath. Amalei. So Unkelus asks Bilam, Man Choshebahu Alma? Who are the Chashuvim in Olam Haba? Amalei, Bilam responded, Yisrael. They are the Chashuvim Olam Haba. So Unkelus asks him, Ma'olad buke bahu, should I become part of the people of Israel and be Miskayer? Amalei Bilam responded by quoting a pasuk, and lo sidrosh shlomam v'tovasam kol hayamim. And it sounds like he's saying that you should not be doresh b'shlomam. Like he was giving Unkelus a kind of a negative response. And that's typical of Bilam. And the chiddush here is that he takes his hatred to the Jewish people even beyond death. Amalei, Unkelus says to Bilam, Dine dau gavra b'mai. What happened to you up there? What punishment did you receive in Olam Haba? Amalei, Bilam responds, B'shichvas zera rosachas. Now, the idea of shichvas zera in this context is what we call midah keneged midah. It was the eitzah of Bilam, which generated the beginning of Bnei Yisrael's znus with Bnos Moav. And not only that, this might be a punishment for Bilam sleeping with his aton. Azil Unkelus now aske benegida leposhe Yisrael. Now, until now, he was bringing up Bilam, who's a non-Jew, a heathen, but now he's bringing up Jewish poshim who are now in Olam Haba. Amalei, and he says to one of these Poshe Yisrael, Unkelus asks, Man Choshebahu Alma, Amalei Yisrael. Yisrael are the Chashuvim in Olam Haba. Ma'olad buke lahu. Again, he asks the question, should I be Miskayer? Amalei, that Poshe said to him, Tovasam drosh. Do you see that? The difference between Bilam and a Rosh or a Poshe B'Yisrael is one word. Bilam says lo tidrosh b'shlomam, whereas the Poshe Yisrael, no matter how evil he is, he says tovasam drosh, ra'asam lo sidrosh. And the implication here is that you should really become part of the Jewish people. According to the Ben Yehoyada, niskaven lomar lo shiafata osam lasos averos al yidei sheiten lehem cherus v'tova v'chen yatzliach la'aviram al dosam. So I guess he's talking about the impact of the non-Jewish culture. Avlim yaso, somebody says if they'll become part of the Jewish people, drosh tovasam, then you will be able to be doresh b'tovasam. And he says, anyone who comes in contact with Yisrael in a way that he tries to bring evil upon and destruction upon the Jewish people, it's like he's injuring his own eye, his own ability of sight. And the Marsha explains that kol hanogeh bebas eino harei mashchis es oro v'ri'asa v'gam hanogeh b'Yisrael l'ra'ah mashchis u'mechaves oro shel olam. And he quotes the Gemara Bava Basra with regard to Hurdus, who put to death the Chachma Yisrael shekiba es oro shel olam, in the language of the Gemara. Amalei Uncle says, Dina dahu gavra b'mai, what was your punishment in the world to come? Amalei, that Hoshea said, bitzoa rosachas, not b'shifa zero tzachas, but rather bitzoa rosachas. The Omer Mar, and why is the punishment for the Hoshea bitzoa rosachas? Based on a Gemara in Erev and Daf Chof Aleph, kol amalig al divrei chachamim nidon bitzoa rosachas. So the Hoshea is classified here. His profile is that he is malig b'divrei chachamim. He makes fun of the chachamim, and his punishment is soa rosachas. And here there's a comment that Bilam came in Shaholach lekalal Yisrael nenash v'nistames bi'eno achas, because the idea of klala has to do with the kind of evil eye that he put on the Jewish people, and therefore he went blind in one eye. Shenemar, it says ki anogeh bachem nogeh bebas eno, and Bilam is called shesum ha'ayin. He says in the name of the Ben Yehoyada, the ownership of Tzoa Rosachas is in one of two ways. Number one, shetisgalgil nishmaso liachar moso b'toch Tzoa Rosachas shel beis hakisei sherecha rab yosef ki kol sirochon roseach mala reach rab yosef. So this fashtunken smell is the punishment for the Poshe Yisrael. And number two, he says, she'esh hagehenom asher bohu nidon nefachas lo litzoa rosachas v'nidon bo. And all this is the geder, or the personification of schi umos, which is refuse and something that's absolutely disgusting. The Gemara concludes this by saying, "Ma bein Poshe Yisrael bein Nevi'ei umas ha'olam ovdei avodah zara." In the case of Poshe Yisrael, even though during their lifetime they were poshim and they were evildoers, nevertheless after their death they give a good eitzah tova with regard to Bnei Yisrael. As Nevi'ei umas homas avodah zara, even during their lifetime, even if God reveals themselves and they experience nevuah, nevertheless, heimarshiyim l'davara keneged Yisrael afilu lachar mosa. And in the note here, he quotes the Maral Prague, who says that L'Poshe Yisrael Nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu neshama shi tahor mitzad atzmo. That even though the person is a Poshe of Yisrael, his neshama in and of itself is tahora, but Shel ba'olam hazeh not to achar rishus, but ba'olam haba shekvar husar bahem koach harishus sheyudvekim ba ba'olam hazeh nishara etzem nishmasam hatahora ma she'en kein umas ha'olam heim batzmusam roim va'afilu al pischo shel gehenim einam chozrim b'tshuva. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Lazar bo re'ei kama gdola kocha shel busha. Now we go back to the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And you remember that Bar Kamsa was embarrassed, humiliated in front of the Chachamim. Harei Siyea HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Bar Kamsa ve'hichrim es beiso v'sarf es eichol. So as a result of the busha that Bar Kamsa experienced, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow Bar Kamsa to be the cause, but the real ultimate cause and the first cause is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Sivev HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shachachamim, Yekavlu es Daito Shel Rab Zcharia ben Avkulis. And they wouldn't be makriv the korban of the Kesar, and they're not going to put Bar Kamsa to death. And this was how HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mesavev Sivuvim, but it comes through the agency of Bar Kamsa because of his busha. And now the Gemara goes on, having completed the sugya of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. There were three stories. We're up to the second story, and that is Tarnagola v'Tarnagolasa Chorev Tur Malka. So what was the story of the chicken and the hen and the destruction of Har HaMelech, which is otherwise called Tur Malka in Aramaic? The members of this community of Har HaMelech had a minhag. Their custom was when they took a chasan or a kala to the chuppah, mafke kamayu tarnagola v'tarnagolos, as a siman tov that they should have pru revukia tarnagolim, they would take in front of the chasan kala of male and female tarnagolet, chicken. Yom Achad, on one particular occasion, when the Jews took out a tarnagol and a tarnagols in front of the chasav kala, kacholif gunda de Romoy, an entire battalion of the Roman army passed by, vishalkinu minayu, and the Anshe Gdud took these tarnagolim and absconded with them. And what did the Jews do? They were real strong biryonim. Naflu alayu, they pounced upon this Gidud, this battalion of Romaim, and they beat them up. Asu, the people who were beating up these Gidud Romaim, the Amrul Kesar, Mardu Bach Yudai, Asu Alayu. When the Kesar, the Caesar, got word of what they had done, then he came with his army onto Bnei Tur Malka. The Gemara tells us a little bit about the battle of the Romans against Har HaMelech. Havabahu, amongst the Jews of Har HaMelech, there was an individual called Bar Jeroma, a very powerful Jew. Davi Kofitz Mila, V'Kotel Bahu. He could jump a distance of 1 mil, and he would kill the Romans. And at this point, the Romans realized that this Bar Jeroma was a real threat to the Roman armies. He was so powerful, like Shimshon HaGibor. And now we're going to see a phenomenon which just boggles the mind. The Kesar realized that he might be defeated by this Jew by the name of Bar Jeroma. Shakli Kesar L'Tage, he took his crown off his head, Osve'ara, placed it on the ground, V'yomer, and he turns to the Ribono Shel Olam, and he says to the Almighty, Ribone di Alma Kule, Adon Kol HaOlam, I Nichalach, if this is what you want, and therefore our Roman armies will be defeated, Lo Timsere Lahu Gavra, but that person, meaning he's talking about himself in the third person, should not be given over to that person, that fighter, that warrior by the name Bar Jeroma. L'didei u'malchuse, him, meaning referring to himself, and his malchus. So imagine the prayers of an enemy of the Jewish people. Actually, Bar Jeroma said something that he shouldn't have said. V'yomer, he declared, Alo at Elohim zanachtanu v'lo teitzel Elokim b'tzivosenu. We don't need your help, he said to God. You have forsaken us. You left us alone to defend ourselves against the Romans, and we'll succeed. We're going to defeat the Romans, even if God has left us out and ignored us. And as a result of this, Achshale Pume, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring about the death of Bar Jeroma. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, David Nami Omar Hachi, if you study Tehillim carefully, David also made statements like this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you've left us, I'm going to still fight the battles. And he didn't have Kavana Chalila to say that we don't need divine help in our battles. Atmu'e kametame. Really, you have to add an inflection of a question mark. he was asking God, why did you forsake us? Why don't you come out and battle amongst our battalions? But Barjroma said it, b'nichusa, not as a shela, why aren't you with us? But rather he said, God, even if you leave us and forsake us and don't go out in our battalions, we will defeat our enemies. And now the Gemara describes the punishment for Barjroma. Ola beis hakise, he went to the bathroom. Osa darkona, came a snake, and shamte lekarkashese, and ripped open his anus. V'noch nafshe, and as a result, he died. And then, when the Kesar saw that his tefillos were answered, and God hearkened to his prayers, and Barjroma died, Omri declared, Hol visrachish li nisa hazimna, since a miracle happened on this round, and God spared me, ishbekinu, I'm going to leave the Jews alone. Shavkinu v'yazah. And he took his battalions and he packed out. This was a great celebration for the Jewish people in Har HaMelech. Is Dakur, they started dancing, v'ochlu v'shasu, and they had a great celebration, v'adliku shragim, and they lit neros. How intense was the light of the neros? Adischaze bilyona de gushpanka berachok mila. The light was so intense from the candles that they lit that even the members of Caesar, the Caesar's army, were able to see a matbea and see exactly the image on a matbea at a mile away from the city based on that light. When the Caesar saw this, Omar, michta kachadu beyehudai, the Jews are so happy and they're celebrating, they have such self-assurance that I couldn't defeat them. Hadar asa layu, he came back and he fought the battle against Har HaMelech. How many people were killed in Har HaMelech? Omer of Asi Tlas Mea Alfe Shlife Saifa. 300,000 chayalim from the Roman army with swords in their hands. Ailu litur Malka, they went in to Tur Malka, to Har HaMelech, vekotlu Bey, and they destroyed Tlasa Yomi, Tlasa Leilase, continuous hereg for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, Har HaMelech was a gigantic city. And there were parts of the city, they didn't have social media at that time, that didn't know what was going on in the other side of the city. In one half of the city of Har HaMelech, the Jews were dancing and singing. They were in such celebration because they thought they defeated Caesar. But Lo V'Yodei, anybody, they didn't know what was going on the other side of the city where the Jewish community was massacred. And now the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Megillas Esther that we darshan as an allusion to those people who killed in Har HaMelech. Bila Hashem v'lo chama. God took out his anger without any compassion. He's called Na'os Yaakov. And Na'os is a language of Nova. Nova is a beautiful city. Kiyasa Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael. He was the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, what's Na'os Yaakov? Elu Shishim Ribu Ayaros. 600,000 cities. Shahaylo liyane hamelech b'Har HaMelech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed without any compassion 600,000 cities. Tiyomer Rav Yehuda Rav Asi Shishim Rivu Ayaros Haylo liyane hamelech b'Har HaMelech v'chol achas v'achas hayu ba. And each one of these 600,000 cities had a population, Kiyotzi Mitzrayim, of 600,000 Jews. Now, I don't have a calculator right here, but the numbers are staggering. 600,000 Jews destroyed in each of 600,000 cities. Chutz mishalosh, there were 3 cities. Shahayu Bohen Kiflayim Yotzei Mitzrayim. That's 1.2 million Jews. So in other words, every city had 600,000. There were 3 cities that had 1.2 million. The Elohim Kfar Bish, Kfar Shichalayim, and Kfar Dichraya. Now the Gemara is going to analyze each one of these names. Kfar Bish, the word Bish means evil. They were like the Anshe stone, and they never opened their houses for guests. Kfar Shichalayim is called the Fishahoisa Parnasasa Mina Shichalayim, some kind of food called Shichalayim. He calls it a krishim min yerek. It's a kind of a vegetable. And finally, Kfar Dichraya, Amar Rab Yochanan. Dichraya means male, zcharim. Shahayin shosem yoldos zecharim tchila yoldos nekeva bachrona. They had many, many sons, and finally one female at the end, uposkos, and they stopped giving birth. Amar Ula L'didi chazili hahu asra. I saw this place called Haramelech. Ba'afilu shitin rivasach kani lo machzik. I don't get it. You're talking about a gigantic place with 600,000 massive cities? I saw the place. You couldn't even put 600,000 kanim, reeds, in such a small place. You're a bunch of liars, because you told us about these massive cities. And these were tiny, tiny cities. You couldn't even put 600,000 reeds inside the city. Amalei, Sir Reb Chanina responded to the Tzduki. He says, you're right. Bisman Ezeh, Eretz Yisrael is not today what it was then. It's Chareva, it's destroyed. And that which was expanded, today it's so small, it's so shrunk, that you can't even put 600,000 poles or reeds. However, at the time that the land of Israel was settled, there were 600,000 cities. And that's what the pasuk means when it says Eretz Tzvi Ksivba. Eretz Yisrael in Sefer Daniel Perek Yud Aleph is called Eretz Tzvi. It has the nature of a tzvi. Ma tzvi ze ein oro machzik es besoro. When you strip the hides of a tzvi, then eino begodel kol besoro. In other words, the basar expands in such a way that you could never, like, if you would reattach the hide on the outside and try to cover the goof, it would never be enough. Is Kach Eretz Yisrael, it also expands. Bisman sheyoshvim oleh, Klal Yisrael are settled in the land, Ravcha. It expands. So Bisman she'ein Yisrael oshen oleh gamda, it becomes shrunk. It gets miskaveses. Now the Gemara is going to tell us about another location that was destroyed. And that's called Kfar Sachnia, which was in Mitzrayim. And why was it destroyed? Rabbi Yomi bar Chilkia, Rabbi Chini bar Tuvia, Rabbi Huna bar Chia v'Yasvi, Gabi Adodi, the 3 great rabbis were sitting together, the Amri, and they said the following: Ika deshmile milsa b'kfar Sachnia shel Mitzrayim lema. If there's someone here amongst us who can tell us what they heard about the people of Kfar Sachnia, Were they tzaddikim? Were they rishoyim? Lema, let him say. Pasach Adminai, one of the three got up and he said, Maise bi orus farusasa. Amongst the people who lived in Kfar Sachnia, there was an orus and arusa, shenishbu lebein ovdei kocham. They were taken captive. B'hisium zelazeh. I'm not exactly sure why, but the idolaters decided to marry off the orus to the arusa. There was an engaged couple, so to speak. But they don't have a ksuba. They were in Chevy. They couldn't write a ksuba. Amrolo, the arusa says to the orus, "V'akoshim imchal tigabi." Don't come near me. Why? She'en li ksuba mimcha. And I'm asura lecha because there's no ksuba. And that's based on the Gemara that Habal Isha Lelo Ksuba violates Losia Kadesha Mibnos Yisrael. Also comes under the halacha of the Brisa Kalab Lo Brocha Asura Labaila Kedid. The Orus was living together with Zarusa. They shared the same bed. They were married, and yet he never touched her until the day of his death. When he died, Amr Lahem, she told the other people who were in captive, Siftu Lizet. We should recite a eulogy for this person. Shepitpeit beYitzro. He was mezalzel in the Yetzer Hara. He was misgaber on the Yetzer Hara, Yosef, even greater than Yosef, because Yosef lo havi elachad shaita. The Masechet Potiphar was only a one-time thing. But here, kol yoma v'yoma, day after day, he was misgaber on his Yetzer. V'li Yosef la b'chad mita. He didn't sleep with her in one bed and with Masechet Potiphar. B'chad mita. We were sleeping in the same bed. And he never touched me. Ve'ilu Yosef lav ishto. They weren't married. She was married to Potiphar. V'hai, but this man ishto, he was together with his arusa, and yet lo nagav. So we see from this story that the people of Kfar Sachnia were tzaddikim. However, Pasach Idach V'Yomar, there was another Amora who told the story, Maisa in Kfar Sachnia, V'Omdu Arboim Modios B'Dinar. With one single dinar, you could purchase 40 modios of tfuah. Modios is a certain volume of tfuah. Let's see if he tells you here. No, he just says Shem Mida Shal Tfuah. Apparently, it's a serious volume of tfuah. Then all of a sudden, Nechsar Hashar, the market value change, Modia Achas. You could only buy 39 modios for one dinar. So they knew that something was going wrong. There was a sima min hashamayim that they were being punished. Ubadku, matzu, and they found Av ubno shabo al nar murasa b'yom kippur. A father and his son both had a relationship with a married woman on Yom Kippur. And this they had edus. Hevium lebezin uskolim, and they gave him skila. B'chazar hashalom kom, and immediately they were able to buy 40 modios for one dinar. So we see that they weren't all tzaddikim in the Kfar Sach. Pasach Idach. Now another one tells us, the man decided he wants to divorce his wife. He's had it with her, but he had agreed at the time of the marriage to a very hefty sum for the ksuba. He didn't want to pay that money. Ma'asa. So now he frames his wife. How? Holach v'zimin es shoshvinov. He invites his relatives, ve'chila v'shkam, and shikram. They get drunk. Hishkivam al mita achas, he puts them together with his wife on one bed. Ve'evi lovan beit, so he's going to make a facsimile semen. And this is the outer part of an egg, which is similar to shikvas zora. Ve'hetel beineim, and he puts it on the sheets. Ve'hamidlem edim, and he set up witnesses that would testify that they were sleeping in the same bed with his wife, and that they saw that there was shikvas zera in the middle. Ubal bezdin, he comes in front of the bezdin. He says, I don't have to pay the wife that I'm divorcing, her ksuba. She was mizana with my relatives. In that bezdin, there was one wise scholar, mitalmidei Shammai HaZaken, and his name was Bava ben Buta Shmod. There's a whole Agadata in the Durham, I think, about this Bava ben Buta. Omalahem, he says to them, I know how to check out whether or not that is really shikvas zara. Because kach muvlani v'shamai hazaken lovan beitza soled min ha'ar. The white part of the egg gets dried up, and if you put it near a fire, it becomes maglid. Maglid means like, when you have a petza, it's maglid, it's like a scar tissue. But shikvas zera docha min ha'ar. Shikvas zera does not expand, but on the other hand, it becomes more and more absorbed in a garment. So we have an eitzah now, we could check whether or not this was really shikvas zara. Badku matzu kidvarav, and they found with this scientific study that this was not shikvas zara vevi'u. They brought this man who wanted to divorce his wife and not pay the ksuba bezdin vehilkuhu. Like bezdin has the power and the authority to give malchus, even if someone's not chayiv malchus. Vigbi'u ksuba menu, and they made him pay this very exorbitant ksuba. We saw the story about the Oris and the Arusa. They were such tzaddikim. And not only that, the fact that immediately after they punished an evildoer who was immediately Hashem brought them back to the original state where they had such a massive amount of tvua that they bought for a pittance for 1 dinar, is my time of Yenesh. Why was it that Kfar Sachnia was completely destroyed? Amalei, Rav Yosef said, Mishum tlo ibul al Yerushalayim. I say this with almost like tears in my eyes, that an entire city of Israel was wiped off the map because they didn't have Avelis for the Churban Yerushalayim. I know, what should we say today? It says in Yeshaya Novi, Simchu es Yerushalayim v'gilu bakal over sisu at ito masos kol misablim olecha. Now, this pasuk really only tells us that those who are happy about Yerushalayim b'tif arta are those who are misabel on Yerushalayim. It doesn't say the flip side, that those who are not misabel Yerushalayim will be destroyed. So this is a kasha of the Mefarshim. Maybe it means that if you're not misabel in Yerushalayim, you won't be part of the simcha. But does that mean that you deserve to be destroyed? In any event, the midah keneged midah here is if that you don't sense the churban, then you will experience churban. Now, in the footnote here, he quotes the Agos of Rabbi Yerucham Perlau on Rasag, and he says here, "Misug Yosei yesh lochiach keharishonim shesovu she'eni isu ledoros lachzol mitzrayim." Why were they looking for a sin that caused the destruction of a city in Mitzrayim. If the Jews were living in Mitzrayim, they violated, I can tell you what sin they violated. They violated the sin of going back to Mitzrayim. But there are many Rishonim who hold that there's no Isur Lidoros, Lachzor Mitzrayim. The Isur only was at the time that the Mitzrayim were Mefusamim B'chol Toeva. So the Gemara didn't give that answer that Kfar Sachla Mitzrayim were punished because they lived in Mitzrayim, because that Isur didn't apply in that period of time. However, the Gemara in Sukkah on Daf Nun Aleph seems to assume that even Bisman Hazeh is an Isur to go back and settle in Mitzrayim. So we're going to have to say that there were two causes that brought about the Churban of Kfar Sachla. Number one, that they lived in Mitzrayim. Number two, that they weren't misabel on Yerushalayim. Maybe the two are connected. Ashka de Rispak Chorev Beisar. Rabbi Yochanan back on Daf Nun Hey told us that because of the story that happened with the wall, the side of a woman's chariot, the city of Beitar, one of the most tragic destructions, catastrophic destructions in Jewish history, was brought about. In Beitar, the people would know, if a woman gave birth to a male child, Shasli Arza, they would plant Eitz Eretz, which is what in English Eretz is I think it's called a cedar tree, if I'm not mistaken. If she gave birth to a female, Shasli Tornisa. This is a female version of the Eitz Eretz. It's otherwise known as a Shita. The Havi Mitzvah, whenever there was a marriage in Beitar, they would cut off these trees, the Avru Ginana, and they would make a chuppah out of this wood. And again, the symbol is that they would have both male children and female children. Yom Echad, the daughter of the Kesar was going by the city of Beitar, Itvar Shaka de Rismek, and the side of her royal chariot for women, they had a special Makavas Noshim, broke down. So what did her servants do? Katsu Arzoviailu. They cut down this cedar tree that had been planted by the Jews after a woman gave birth to a boy, and they brought her this wood in order to fix the dofen, the wall of the Merkava, of the chariot. The Jews didn't tolerate that. Asu nafla alayu michunhu. The Jews jumped on top of these avodim and started beating them up. This was the Jewish Defense League of that. Okay. And they thought that the Romans had come to uproot this cedar tree that was planted at the time of the birth of a boy in order to allude that they want to undermine and destroy all the newborn baby boys, like Paro of Russia, who said, Ya'ora Tashlichun. And therefore they jumped on them and started beating them up. Also, the word got back to the case that the Jews have rebelled, also alayu, and they came to destroy the city of Beitar. And now we have a drasha in the pasuk regarding Anshe Beitar. Eicha Beis, Goda b'chari af kol Keren Yisrael. In God's anger, He destroyed the Keren Yisrael. Amalei Reb Zimra Babam Reb Yochanan. Elu shmonim elef karnei milchama. Shenichnesu lekrach Beitar b'shah shalachdua. So the battalions came and they blew their shofros, 80,000 of them. Shenichnasu lekrach Beitar b'shah shel achdua v'hargu ba'anoshim noshim v'taf. If I'm not mistaken, according to one account, 500,000 Jews were destroyed. And their blood was so voluminous that it flowed into the Mediterranean Sea. So maybe you'll say Beitar was right on the Mediterranean. No, Rachoko, it was a meal away. But there was so much blood that it just rolled down into the sea. Tanya, we looked at the Bryce of There's a place, a location called Bikas Yadayim, and there are two rivers there. Echad Moshech Ilach. One of them draws in one direction. The Nachal Echad Moshech Elach. And the other river draws in the opposite direction. When the people of Beitar were destroyed, were killed, and their blood spilled, their blood rolled down into these two rivers, V'shiaru Chachamim, and Chachamim estimated that in these two Nechalim, Shnei Chalokamayim v'Echad Dam, 2/3 were water, and 1/3 of the river was made of blood from the massive volume of blood of the members of the city of Beitar that spilled into these Nechalim. Masdisa Ton and a Bryce we learned Sheva Shanim Batzru Ovdei Kochamis Karmea Midam Shel Yisrael. The blood of the Jewish people fertilized the land of the idolaters and their vineyards. And for 7 years below Zevel, they didn't have to add any fertilizer.